told you that George and Lenny didn't really exist. There are no eyewitnesses to testify to the fact that these events really happened. Would the novel then be worthless? No. But what if you read your science book and it talks about these animals called, I don't know, squirrels, and all their characteristics, and it turns out that squirrels don't exist? Is that a problem?
Yeah.
So they're very different types of books. So my question is this. If we look at Genesis, the first 11 chapters or so of Genesis, these are about things before recorded history. This is about the creation of the world. There is no eyewitness of the creation of the world. So should we expect these texts to have the same characteristics of an eyewitness account or history or a science textbook thousands of years before anybody thought of writing a science textbook? Should I expect it to be like that? Or should I expect a book that's written when myths are very common that express spiritual truths to be more like a myth that expresses a spiritual truth? Anybody ever heard of the myth of Icarus? All right, what's the story of Icarus?
I've heard about it. I have no idea what
Okay, anybody? Remember, he's the guy that he and his father, they make wings out of wax and feathers. As soon as I say that, some of you are it's going to click, right? They make wings, they wax wings, and they fly. And Icarus' father gives him some advice. He says, son, no matter how high you fly, anybody know? Don't fly too close to the sun, because the heat from the sun will melt the wax. Now, first of all, just as a side note, can you imagine the pecs you'd have to work wings of wax so strong, like that you fly? Can you imagine that? Look at an Olympic gymnast who does the rings. See how long you can hold this position, and then tell me that you'd be able to flap enough that you could fly and control your altitude. Right? Second, first of all, the feathers have no point, right? Not like they're there for a real point. I don't know why their feathers involved anyway. But third, what happens as you get closer to the sun? Does it get hotter?
Yes. No, it gets cold.
If I leave the ground and start moving up,
It'll get colder.
it actually gets colder. The atmosphere gets colder. I'd freeze long before my wings would melt. Does that mean we should... By the way, Icarus flies too close to the sun, wings melt, he falls to his death. Okay. Does that mean we should toss out the myth? It's pointless?
No,
What's the purpose of
moral
myth?
the story.
What's the moral of the story?
The moral of the story is like, don't become greedy. Don't keep
Yeah.
trying to go higher.
It's a warning about hubris. We want you to go out and do great things, but if you think you can do things you can't, it's not going to be good. So, when we look at Genesis, it's written at a time when that sort of story is a lot more common. So shouldn't we expect it to be like the other things that come out of that time? So is it possible that Genesis is meant to imply that the world has a cause outside of itself, that man has a special place in the world, that God and man have a unique and unrepeatable relationship, rather than that it happened in 6 literal days? Is that possible? Yeah, and in fact, that's what the Catholic Church would teach. Now, some of you might have been brought up in Christian denominations that don't necessarily have that view, that would accept Genesis as a literal text. The world was made in 6 literal days. The Catholic Church would dispute that and say that's not the sort of text Genesis is intended to be. I don't want to stomp on anybody's upbringing, but that's just sort of the Catholic position. Okay. So, if you have that view that Genesis, that 6 days is true, evolution is of course going to come into conflict with it, right? But the fact that things evolved does not disprove that there might be a cause outside the universe. Are there scientists against Darwin, which was a great question? Are there scientists who disagree with Darwin, who think he's wrong? I'd like to distinguish between evolution and what Darwin did. Evolution is the concept that living things have changed over time. Are there scientists who seriously dispute that? Not really, not to my knowledge, right? And I'm sure Mrs. O'Connor can tell you more than I could even. But what we do have disputes about is the specifics of that. Darwin introduces natural selection. That is one of the ways in which evolution occurs, not the only one. So since Darwin, we discovered more ways that evolution occurs. Darwin did what he did without knowing about genetics, right? Genetics is discovered by, anybody know his name? Gregor Mendel, who was not only a Christian, but a monk, by the way, if you think scientists can't be Christians. So we've got genetics, we've got Copernicus, we got the guy who invented the Big Bang Theory, by the way, Catholic priest. Once we knew about genetics, we learned a lot more that Darwin didn't know. So are there scientists who seriously dispute any concept of evolution in general? Not a whole lot. Are there scientists who think Darwin might have only seen part of the picture and we can correct and refine what he said? Absolutely. But that's kind of where the disagreement comes as opposed to with the general idea. Another question or two, then I'll open it up to what questions you still have. Could God's plan include evolution? Absolutely. I mean, there was a heresy in the early church called Gnosticism. Gnosticism believed that man was so different from the rest of the world that he was lonely, right? We look around, we see animals, we see trees, we don't see anything like us, right? But then Gnosticism said that God is so remote that we can't have a relationship with God. So we can't have a relationship with the world, can't have a relationship with God. It's kind of a lonely place to be, right? But that was condemned as a heresy. We believe that we bear similarities with God. We can have a relationship with God. But at the same time, what if God decided that by developing our physical attributes, not our soul, our physical attributes, by evolution, we can actually create a bond with the rest of the world? You're a part of this whole thing called the universe. You're not just some weird thing. You're not an alien. You're at home here in the world that God gave you. There's a certain beauty in that idea, I think. So could God have chosen evolution as the way to develop those physical sides of ourselves that make us united with the rest of creation? Possibly. I think it's kind of a nice thought, to be honest with you. Yeah. So that's kind of what I have for my my prepared part of this. But I'm sure we got some questions out there. So just wanted to open it up at this point to see if you had any follow-up questions on any of this, or questions that you asked that I didn't answer. What do you still want to know? What questions you got? And this is just raise your hand, fire away, like there's no protocol here. Who wants to be first?